Welcome everyone to another NASCAR Heat Evolution video. In this video, we're not going to be looking at setups or gameplay. We're going to be looking at controller settings. Now, I've done, actually my very first video on NASCAR Heat Evolution was about setting up your controller and mapping the various controllers. That's not what this video is about. This video is about the in-game control settings. But before we get there, there's one thing under game settings that I want to take a look at. Now, under game settings, by default, you'll see this particular screen, which allows you to set the amount of damage you want to have during your practice and race sessions, race mode, and session settings, and so on. But if you'll see at the bottom of the screen, there's an advanced settings. If you're not familiar with this screen, now at the very beginning when the game was released, there was an option for the physics and the transmission. But they've added an option since then for always use custom setup. And so if you come in here, you want to change that, make sure it's on yes. Otherwise, it will by default take you to the default setup. So any of the setups that you want to try to use, you'll have to actually choose it within the practice screen itself. Using this, it will automatically default to using a custom setup whenever you load a particular track. All right, so with that in mind, let's go over to the Controls tab and take a look at the wheel settings that I'm currently using. Now, as I've mentioned in a previous video, I have recently, over a couple of days ago now, I swapped from using a Logitech Driving Force GT wheel to now I'm using a Logitech G920 wheel and pedal set. So before I had a different wheel and also separate pedals, so I wasn't even using the Logitech pedals at that point. Now I'm using the full setup for the Logitech G920 wheel and pedals. So let's take a look at what some of these settings do within the game and how they affect how you play the game, because they can make a huge difference. Let's start with the device rotation range. Now this is going to work backwards to what you would think it would work. By default, the wheel I'm using, the G920, is a 900-degree wheel, meaning that the wheel will have from all the way to the left lock, all the way to the right lock, and will have a full 900 degrees of rotation, which is fairly standard these days for sim racing wheels. Well, if you see at the bottom right of the screen, or toward the bottom right-hand portion of the screen, you'll see an option to test the sensitivity. So let's go ahead and do that now. And I know this will be a little bit difficult since you can't actually see me turning the wheel, so I'm going to describe it to you while I do it. So we're going to press X, as it mentions, to test the sensitivity at 900 degrees. And the way I'm going to do this for you guys is I'm going to turn my wheel 90 degrees to the left. Okay, and we can see the steering bar as it turns back and forth, as I move the wheel back and forth. We can see how far that equates to on the line. So we're definitely not close to being all the way to the left here, but we can see how far that does turn. I'm going to return the wheel back to normal, press B to get out of that, and then we're going to change that rotation from 900 to 360. Okay, now we're going to test the sensitivity again. Once again, I'm going to turn the wheel 90 degrees to the left, and you can see that we're not even half the distance traveled on that line that we were before. So I'll return the wheel to center and then do that again. We're at 90 degrees to the left, and you can see that marker didn't move very much. What happens in this game is, as we get out of that rotation, you can notice that the higher the device rotation range that you use, in this case 900 being the maximum, the more sensitive the steering becomes, meaning that the higher the number I use here, the less I'm going to have to turn the wheel to get the car to turn. So if you have a steering wheel and you're trying to use some of these setups and you find that the car is just spinning out loose and it's hard to control the car, try coming in here and simply reducing the rotation range. So let's go all the way down to the absolute minimum of 90 degrees, and we're going to test the sensitivity again. Once again, I'm going to turn the wheel 90 degrees to the left, and you can see that it is barely moving at all on that steering line. So as you can see, changing from 900 degrees all the way down to 90 degrees makes a huge difference in how your car is going to handle. Now, I can tell you that the settings you see on the screen right now are the settings I'm currently using, but I can tell you this is huge. Now, this actually is backwards. What should be happening is the higher the device rotation range, the less sensitive the steering should be, but it's the opposite in the game, which is, I'm sure it's throwing a lot of people off because it would throw me off. So in my case, it was not something that I really messed with. I wanted to use the full 900-degree rotation of the wheel I have, and so I didn't change it. And it wasn't until I got in here playing around with some things until I realized that, wait, that makes a huge difference, and it's completely backwards from the way it should be. So this is one of the most important uh, pieces of the puzzle to setting up your wheel in the game, is to make sure you get this right. Again, you can see, and let's test the sensitivity one more time at the bare minimum of 90 degrees. Again, I'm turning the wheel a full 90 degrees to the left, and the steering bar is barely moving. So if you're finding the car is too twitchy and way too loose for you, try reducing this device rotation range. Okay, let's move on to the steering sensitivity. Again, this will have a big effect. As you can see, I'm using a setting that's just a couple of ticks from the far left. Now, why have I increased that some at all? Well, this really goes all to preference. It makes the farther to the right you get the wheel, or the farther to the right you get this particular setting for speed sensitivity, you're going to find that the wheel is going to be more sensitive and turns even quicker. So let's go ahead and test the sensitivity to the far, when it's on the far right. Once again, I'm going to take the wheel, turn it 90 degrees to the left, and as you can see, I didn't even get all the way to 90 degrees to the left, and the wheel and the steering bar was all the way to the left. So as well as the device rotation range, the steering sensitivity has a huge effect on that. Okay, so now we're going to try the steering sensitivity all the way to the left. We're going to do the same test, turn the wheel 90 degrees to the right, and you can see where it ends up. So it's a huge difference. Now this is a personal preference thing, really. And you'll be able to see as I turn it a little bit more, it doesn't have a huge difference. So as long as you're within a notch or two, then you're not going to make a huge difference. The big difference will be if you go from the far left, which I'm assuming is linear steering. Again, that's just an assumption on my part, which I'm not even very comfortable making, given the fact that the rotation range seems to be completely backwards in this game. So, but the way I'm understanding this, the steering sensitivity all the way to the left is linear steering. And then as you go beyond that toward the right, it actually speeds up the steering, makes it even more sensitive. So I've chosen, for now, this could easily change, but for now I'm running it a couple of settings, a couple of notches up from the far left. Let's move on to the brake sensitivity. As you can see, I've got it all the way to the left. I've had tons of trouble with the braking here, but let's go ahead and test the sensitivity here. All right, so we start with foot off the pedal, and I go all the way to the full extent that I can press the pedal, full amount of travel. And what actually happens is the brake meter reaches full travel on the screen about 5% or so before I reach full travel, which is good for me. And that says, again, just as with the steering, I assume that the far left setting is linear. So let's move that all the way to the right and see what difference it makes. Okay, we're going to test again. I'm going to head toward full, and before I even get to 3/4 of the way through the travel of the brake pedal, I've already reached the full number on the brake setting here. So what happens is the higher you set the brake sensitivity, the quicker and more sensitive the brake becomes. So if you're having trouble with the brakes where you're getting on the brakes hard going into the corner at somewhere like Phoenix or Richmond or Martinsville or whatever the case may be, and you're finding that you're getting on the brake at the same place as what you've seen me do in a video or somebody else do in a video, but yet your car just isn't slowing down enough, then try increasing this brake sensitivity number, moving it more toward the right, and that should help out with that. But just be careful, because the more you increase the sensitivity, it can get out of control and make the car want to lock up the brakes. Okay, let's move on to the throttle sensitivity. Now, this is one that can definitely have some effects for you. And you can see, first of all, that I am 2 notches from the far left. The reason why I don't have this set at the far left is because I want to make sure that I'm getting full throttle, which, as you can imagine, is extremely important at somewhere like Daytona or Talladega, where you're full throttle the entire lap and you never lift. So if I am full left, which would be, I assume, full linear with the throw or the travel of the pedal, let's go ahead and try it. So I'm going to test this out, and as I get, all right, so I am now full travel of the pedal, and you can see there is still a little bit of line left above where my current setting is. So I'm not reaching full throttle at this particular moment. So I'll back out of that, move this up 2 notches, try it again. Let's test, and you can see, bang, it gets there just before I reach full travel of the throttle pedal, which is what I want. Because what I want, if you think in terms of percentage, going back to the very first video I did on setting up your wheel and pedals, there's a setting in the text file itself which will allow you to say, do you want to start at 0 and end at 100? Well, if you can back that 100 down to about 95 or 90, what it will do is it'll make sure that once you get to 90 or 95% throttle travel, that registers as full throttle. I would prefer to use something like 95%. But in this menu, I don't have that particular option. I've got a slider. So I've chosen to go up 2 notches because I want to simply make sure that I'm getting full throttle whenever I think I'm at full throttle. Okay, so again, the farther to the right, the more sensitive the throttle is going to be, and the quicker you're going to get to full throttle. And to test that out, we're going to move the sensitivity setting all the way to the right, and then try this test again. Okay, now I'm at full throttle, and I am probably 60% through the travel, but the game is registering full throttle right here, but I'm probably 60, maybe 65% throttle actually with my foot pressing down. So you don't want to get too carried away with throttle sensitivity, or you'll end up making the gas pedal more like an on and off switch rather than a pedal itself. Okay. Force feedback strength is, again, more of a personal preference and will vary wildly depending on the wheel. I know this firsthand because the Driving Force GT, I had this slider all the way to the right, full force feedback strength, and it was perfectly fine for me. It was no trouble. Once I swapped over to the G920, I had been running with the force feedback strength, again, maxed out all the way to the right, and it's still okay. However, the force feedback with the G920 I found is, for me, it's much stronger than the Driving Force GT was. So for now, I've backed off to about halfway on this, and this is something I'll continue to play around with. It's personal preference. Um, One of the tricks that those of us who have been playing racing sims for quite a while, going back to NASCAR Racing 2003 and even before that, one of the tricks that you learn is on tracks like Daytona and Talladega, if you'll turn the force feedback down very low or even off, you can actually help your lap times because it makes the wheel, it's easier to hold a smooth and steady wheel in the corners, which scrubs off less speed. So keep that in mind if that's something you want to try out on those tracks. Now, I can tell you for the particular Daytona video that I did, I didn't use that trick, but because I wanted to keep everything standard for you guys. But that is something you can do if you're having a hard time holding your line at particularly somewhere like Daytona or Talladega and the car's washing up in the corners. Try reducing the force feedback strength some, and that may help you run a better line. All right, impact effects I have turned off. I started out playing the game with this on, but I found that playing with the AI that they ran into me quite a bit. And every time you hit the wheel, I didn't want that huge vibration in it and the wheel to sort of jerk out of my hands and risk, breaking a wrist or fingers or something. So I simply turned that off. It just wasn't worth it to me. Uh, Shift type defaults to paddle for me because I don't have the add-on shifter for this game. So I really don't have a way to shift using the stick shift. So if you do have the add-on shifter, then you can use the stick shift model, which of course would allow you to also use a clutch. The G920 pedals do have a clutch, but for me, it's basically useless at this point because I don't have the add-on shifter. So by default, most people will have this to off unless you do have a stick shift add-on as well as a clutch. So hopefully this video has been helpful. By no means are my settings the optimum settings or the best settings. Some of these things like force feedback strength are individual preferences. How strong do you want the feedback to be? And there's no right or wrong answer there. Same thing with some of these sensitivities. It's going to vary based off of your preference, your driving style, and also what wheel and pedal set you're using. I would love to be able to use a throttle sensitivity setting all the way to the left and get completely linear sensitivity on this and use the entire throw or travel of the pedal, but based on how the game is recognizing this, it's just not possible for me. So I've moved this setting up a couple of notches just to make sure that I'm getting full throttle. Same thing with brakes. The brake setting here, even though it has the same resolution because it's on the same pedal set, I'm able to use all the way to the left on it. And steering sensitivity, again, this is more of a personal preference thing for sure. And I've chosen to use, a notch or two from the left on it as well. The biggest setting being the 900 degrees. If you feel the car is getting really twitchy on you and it's really just hard to control, definitely lower this number down and you'll see that to start changing. Hope you've enjoyed the video and definitely hope that this helps some of you out. I know there's been a lot of struggle with controlling the car and steering wheel settings in general. And stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat Evolution.